like to call this meeting to order, and before we begin, this meeting is going to be, I guess broadcast is probably not the right word, but it's going to be streamed through Facebook Live, and Shireen is going to make some comments about that.
Simulcast.
Simulcast, is that the...
Yes.
There we go. Is that the terminology?
So, as you know, the meetings here are usually just streamed on Civic Center TV. But in addition, today's meeting and the future meetings of this committee will be streamed on Facebook as part of a pilot project that we are doing to go to where citizens are. Council members, to be compliant with Brown Act, please do not view the Facebook stream or its comments during the session. You can only view the comments after the session.
Okay.
And just one further note is that in next month's meeting, we'll do a demo that shows the Facebook live stream, as well as another tool that we are beta testing with Box called Box Skills, and it's a artificial intelligence video search function that will make it much easier to find content for our residents on City Council committee meetings. Thank you.
Fantastic, and it's really an honor that we're making history here. Streaming our first Facebook Live, and I thought it was in honor of my birthday, but I realized that we already had this plan. So
we will be singing "Happy Birthday" at the end of the meeting, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it definitely is a testament to the innovation that we're implementing here in the city of San Jose. Want to start off by, we have a request for deferral on the first item, which is requested to defer to June 7th, and that's the digital services strategy. So can I get a motion? Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right. Nothing on the consent calendar, so let's go to our first report, which is Innovation Roadmap. And Kip is going to kick it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, members of the public. Kip Harkness, Deputy City Manager. The agenda today is really all about what it takes to be a smart city. You'll see this Innovation Roadmap update. We'll also have a discussion later of the emerging Internet of Things strategy, describe our approach to privacy, and have a chance to hear directly from Facebook about the Facebook Telegraph project. So let me jump right into our Innovation Roadmap update. And as you recall, these are the 22 items that have been prioritized. It's about a year old, back in January 2017. And we've organized these roughly into 8 product lines of similar projects, and then the shading from dark to lighter is a prioritization, essentially going from non-negotiable citywide to emerging projects that haven't been fully prioritized. As a reminder, this roadmap will be evolving. This is the 1.0. We want to see a full smart cities roadmap, not just an innovation roadmap as our 2.0, and I'll talk about that evolution later. But for the rest of this fiscal year, you will continue to see the existing roadmap and its variations. So when we last left our innovation heroes back in February, this was the status of the roadmap. It's a straightforward traffic light, green on track, yellow, we have some issues, red, seriously at risk or corrective actions needed. We had, as you see, a couple of items red, some yellow, and quite a bit of green. As we move forward to today, you can see some pretty significant shifts, and you can see immediately that we've had some changes and issues with implementation. One project, the radar sensor module strategy, has improved from red to yellow as we are working collaboratively with our startup partner to solve some data validity issues. However, the rest of the changes since February have been downgrades in status. I'm going to focus on some of the more serious ones, and then I'll be open to questions later. So in terms of some of the red status items, the LED streetlight / Anycom pilot, as you know, we terminated the Anycom pilot after being unable to reach an agreement in the time frame that was desired. So that item is red and will eventually be pulled off of the roadmap, but we wanted to put it on there red to acknowledge it. The LED streetlights we've actually have as yellow. We're continuing to work and in fact are increasing our work on strategies for the LED conversion including possible multiple strategies toward that. And we'll return to council in the form of an info memo on our work on the LED streetlight strategies in short order. But that has not stopped. In fact, that work has accelerated. Access East Side is downgraded to red. While we successfully launched in October the first attendance area, we've run into some cost issues, and we need to sit down with our partners and work through those before we can bring them back to you. We're confident that we can do that, but we wanted to red light that to be, again, candid with ourselves on that. Citywide data architecture remains red, though there is potential now with this emerging budget that we'll be able to address some of those red issues and bring that up on the traffic light. But until that makes the pass through, it remains red. And then a new item is the integrated permitting system. This is a pretty significant set of scheduling issues that are in place right now, and so what we're doing is we are moving forward with a health check on our approach. We've already reset our approach and are working forward. The purpose of the health check is to get some independent validation and verification to make sure that the way we're moving forward doesn't just land us in the same place that we are now with the scheduled delays. This too is an item where we'll also come to you with more detail on, both in the ad hoc committee and through an info memo, but I wanted to be true to the rationale of our innovation roadmap and highlight the red status here. So contextually, if you kind of look back and forth, you can the sort of good news, bad news about the innovation roadmap updates. Bad news is, as you can see from getting a little bit more red and a little bit more yellow, innovation is hard, and implementation at scale of projects like updating our website, converting thousands of streetlights, or updating our permit processes are complicated change initiatives that require improvements not only in technology, but also processes and skilling of our people. This update suggests we still have a lot of work to do to strengthen our core muscle and capability around innovation. The good news for me is that's exactly what this roadmap was intended to do, is to shine an honest spotlight on what our strengths and weaknesses are and catch them early. A number of these projects, which are yellow or red, in the normal course of things, I think would have gone much farther before we were able to jump in and begin the collaborative problem-solving work. So I'm not giving us a pass on this by any means. There's an awful lot of work for us to do, and we need to get it back on track toward green. But I am appreciative of the fact that this agile framework, the forced reporting out to you on a regular basis in a consistent pattern, has actually been helpful for us to manage the internal items. Very quickly, in 2018, we have some goals on this. Given the direction from you, we'll be evolving, as I mentioned, this Innovation Roadmap 1.0 to a Smart Cities Roadmap 2.0. That'll probably mean about 4 things at least. One, that will move from smaller projects to larger strategies, each of which might have a collection of projects underneath them. And we'll be shifting some of the business as usual items out of this roadmap and into the IT roadmap. That will make sure that we're able to continue to monitor them and make sure they come to successful completion, but we'll keep the focus of the Smart Cities roadmap on more pure innovation and new approaches. Third, we'll have a tighter alignment between the Smart City vision and the roadmap, clearly linking back to the original policy language and focus areas so that you can see the connection where there is one, or disconnect if we've got one. And then the last is we expect to have more space and capacity for small-scale, opportunistic partnerships and demonstration projects, like the one that the mayor's office has led today with the clerk and our communications folks, the Facebox Live demo. These small ones are things that we should be able to do multiples of, and right now we are often our own worst enemies in terms of creating barriers to them. So as we evolve the roadmap, we'll both create more space for that and visibility and hopefully more capacity. Finally, we'll define a very lightweight process for graduating victories, removing deprioritized projects or completed work, and adding new projects. We will also be launching, making sure that we bring more real technology to you to demo it and to engage with you. You'll see a little bit of that as we go into Facebook today. So between now and the end of the fiscal year, you'll continue to see iterations on this current roadmap. The budget process itself will set some of the priorities that give us that full-blown Smart Cities 2.0. And in September, when we meet back again, is when you'll first see the cut of our new Smart Cities roadmap for your feedback and direction. With that, I'll stop and take any questions or comments that the committee might have.
Councilmember Davis?
Thank you. Thank you, Kip, for the presentation. One of the things I didn't hear you mention, I noticed the website redesign went from green to yellow. Is it schedule, budget, or scope that is the issue?
It's schedule. As we've dug into it and really want to make sure that the design really works and is really customer focused, we've pushed the schedule back a bit. And we've also realized we need to do a bit better job of engagement with some of the key partners, including, not coincidentally, the elected officials. So we're going to spend a little bit more time connecting with our department heads. We're going to be putting some items on the agenda for you to consider and for you to engage in and for your staffs to engage in. And we're also taking an extra bit of time to make sure that we've really got the designs right. So it's not a red line, it's not a huge pushback, but it is one that is pushing back the schedule. And the schedule is being pushed back because of our desire to revisit some of the work and decisions that were made and make sure they're done well, not the vendors' issues.
Okay, that's good to hear. How much is the schedule slipping?
I can get back with you on the specifics on that. I don't think we have. I think it's a. If Rosario is here, I don't think she is. Let me not make up a slippage date,
Good.
but I'll get back
Yeah.
with you on that.
Thank you. The reason I'm asking is because, as you know, our website redesign is long overdue, and so if we can get a good version up that maybe isn't perfect and stay on schedule, I think I personally would vote for that, because I hear about it all the time, that it's so hard to find things. So even in maybe a little bit more than incremental, but even if we could get partway there and then make tweaks after the fact, I think would be helpful. The other maybe possibility would be, I know Tony's working on a new library system. Is that going to be able to be added to or integrated with our current website as opposed to waiting for the redesign?
That's already linked on our website.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So it's already there.
Yeah, and it will easily go to the new one.
Okay, thank you.
And to your point about the iterative approach, that's something actually that we're beginning to embrace in the website as well. That's not going to be perfect, and so we're not trying to push everything out perfectly, but we do want to make sure that we're not having people do rework
Sure.
on the 1.0. So you will see the iteration, and this pushback is more to make sure that that first push through is in line with where we want to go from a design standpoint. And I'll get you the exact dates on that to the committee council as a whole.
Okay, and does the first iteration please tell me it includes an improved search functionality?
Yes, search functionality, and also making sure that many of the things which are frequently and commonly asked are just simply right there and visible for
Great.
you, and more of a service delivery approach than a department by department approach. And you'll hear more of that when we start to talk about the digital services strategy.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Thank you. I really appreciate all of the tweaking that you're making to the roadmap, Kip, because I recognize there are a lot of things on this roadmap that are really hard and really big. And you've got a team that's working on a lot of things, I know, and doesn't need more things to work on, but having some low-hanging fruit, some things that we can kind of quickly implement. And they're not always going to succeed, of course, but I think that's just important to be able to demonstrate our continued ability and willingness to adapt and integrate innovation. And so I really appreciate that a lot. Going to the website for a moment, I've heard from members of our team that so far that there seems to be a really substantial upgrade here, and it looks pretty good, which is great. I know it's always a big question about whether it's too soon or not to launch. I'm perfectly happy with hey, the site's up, but it's under construction in these parts kind of thing. If that's what we need to do, I get it. I'm wondering, have we really defined clearly what the top search requests are by the users of our website, our residents? Do we have a really clear idea of that list? And
We have some pretty good data on that. I think what's difficult, though, is that it's not always clear from where people are landing, where they're trying to get to. So I think we have a good handle on what people are coming through our digital front door for, And so we're making a lot of adjustments in this iteration of the website to put that up.
Yeah.
But as we move toward more of a digital services strategy, I think we're going to find a lot more under that rug to be cleaning up.
Right.
For example, when we did some of the user testing, it was interesting because we know what departments things are in, but people will be like, oh, this is related to my home, so I'm going to housing.
Yeah.
Well, no, housing doesn't do that because there's no information on anywhere on the housing's website, but that's intuitively where people think. And so part of what we hope to do is begin to, both in the first launch, but over time, make it much closer to the way that people actually interact with the website.
Yeah.
And in many ways, the My San Jose is our first cut at that.
Right.
By saying that I don't care which department is dealing with the illegal dumping, I don't care whether it's on private property or public, I just want it taken care of. And so
Right.
you'll start to see that over time for more and more of the services in the website.
And so I appreciate you got a lot to accomplish with this, and making it user-friendly is so important. Given the fact that people generally conflate what we do with what the county does, with the water district, the DA, everybody else, everyone just assumes it's the city.
Yeah.
I do wonder to what extent do we want to upfront admit that we're going to be a portal for everything in San Jose, or are we going to just say, yeah, how it is we really ensure that people are going to the right agency for what they need? I'm sure that's something you're grappling with, but even if folks are looking for the best places to catch Pokemon in the city, if we had a website where they knew they went to our portal for that, that would be cool. That may be way too ambitious, but it seems to me that recognizing from the user experience, there's no difference between the city and all these other agencies. Just be helpful, knowing we're not going to be pulling their websites into ours, but just being able to clearly redirect people, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, we'll take that in as we think about the design. My hypothesis on that one is that we should also probably start with the short list of most frequently asked and most frequently confused kind of things.
Right.
And I think, and again, some of the things on My San Jose are right there, right? I don't care whether a street light is a county street light or a city street light, but if it's in front of my street, I want it reported. So how do we get those requests over to the right jurisdiction, and how do we communicate back to the user in a way that isn't just dropping them into a black hole?
Yeah,
so we'll take that point back as we think about the design and try to start with those ones where we're getting the most requests and the most confusion.
Agreed, and thank you. And look, I know you guys are far along, so I'm not looking to throw a wrench in things. If we need to tweak it later, that's fine with me. The integrated permitting system, I know you're going to give us more information. Isn't that in the next month that we're getting that, or?
Yeah, we'll put out some initial information, and then over the next month, we're conducting this health check.
Okay.
And so at the end of that is when we'll really have a sense of, are we on the right track? What additional investments or changes do we need to make? So I expect kind of two levels of communication. One is within the next month, kind of giving an update on where we are, and then after that, really digging deep on the basis of the health check, and hopefully saying yes, we're on the right track, or if not, flagging what we need to do differently.
Okay, great. Are we still, given the challenges we're having, are we still really integrating the upgrade, the implementation of the upgrade with process improvements in that effort? Or right now, are we just trying to get the software in place?
Some are connected and some are not.
Okay.
We are continuing with process improvements which are not dependent on the functionality of the new system. And then we're also keeping an eye on what processes we can improve once we have the new system. Okay. So they're going on parallel tracks, but they're talking to each other at this point.
Okay, good. I heard rumors that there may have been an ability to find a way to move forward with Silver Spring network. Is that now trending toward yellow, or?
Yeah, Silver Spring has been acquired by Itron, something like that.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I got it right. And so there's some renewed interest on the possibility of collaborating with us, and so we're going to have some time. I think we've just scheduled that actually in the last sprint, the meeting, to sit down and meet with them, understand what their appetite is and interest, and see if there's some opportunity to turn that from gray and turn the lights back on that.
Okay, great. Fabulous. Last question I really have is around this roadmap. not expecting all this to magically happen, but I assume you have timelines on virtually all of these projects at this point.
Yeah, some are sketchier and some are really solid. So
Yeah.
and that's part of what we realize is these things are a little bit at a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
And so part of what we want to do in the next iteration is kind of have them more at the same level, and then have a clear understanding of timelines for each of them.
That would be great, just for us to look at, because I know that some of these are going to take more than a year, right?
Right.
I mean, we just know it, and having a good sense about that, and then which ones are just so long in the tooth and they're well beyond their schedule, would maybe help inform us as we think about, well, let's move on to other priorities, right?
Right, and also we think if we can use the roadmap to clarify what midterm deliverables or what kind of minimal viable products we could get out there, we think that that'll be useful to us, because we do tend to kind of hold it all in until we think it's perfect and let it out. And maybe, especially with innovation, we should be more open to letting things out into the world sooner. But our hope is that as you see the 2.0 roadmap, we'll have a more consistency and clarity on schedule.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I just have a quick question, and we're going to be going over the privacy policy engagement. And you might have told us this in a prior committee meeting, but since I'm a year older now, my memory is not what it used to be. So can you help me understand why we don't have the privacy policy specifically identified as one of the items in the innovation roadmap?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
So I was looking for
Yeah, why it hasn't been broken out as a separate item.
why it's not specifically identified as a separate item.
We can certainly do that. It was a subset of our work originally around some of the IoT and the Anycom, and also the digital inclusion. So it probably makes sense to break that out as a separate thing and track that along with it. So I think if I'll take that as a suggestion, I think that's good feedback.
Okay, great. Actually, okay, thank you. And Lund has a
Sorry,
question.
going off that, I had actually been wondering about the Anycom thing for a while, and I know you just said that for whatever reason it didn't follow through like we thought it would, but just I don't know if I missed it or if this is actually the first time that I actually heard that officially through channels. So I don't know if there are other council members who might be wondering about that too. I mean, the public who follows the council meetings but don't follow every single committee. I don't know what we could do, but if there could be like a quick update to the rest of the council, like on some random agenda item. I think that's good to close that loop, because I don't think I knew that prior to today.
Yeah, we sent out an info memo in February that delineated that, and so it was just a one-pager. It may have gone under folks' radar.
Okay.
Bottom line was, we came very rapidly to a conceptual agreement, but then over 7 months of negotiation, didn't get to a point where we had ink on the paper and the way, and at that point we no longer felt comfortable with moving forward. I see. And pivoted. The good news on that, I would say, to add a little color commentary to it, is you'll hear today the IoT strategy that we're developing in parallel, and a lot of our thinking was honed and refined and sharpened by our experiences with Anycom. So I'll make sure we get that, maybe recirculate that info memo, but also be happy to brief any council member or anybody who would like a little more information on that.
Thanks, Kip.
Thank you, Kip. And I think what I'll do is we'll just go through all the committee reports and then accept them all at one time. So we have a speaker for this item, Blair Beekman.
Mic's not on. Okay. Hi. Thank you for talking about this. I'm hopeful the LED streetlight program was once green. It's now yellow, and I find that interesting. I understand that you're going to be taking a 12-month process to look into a privacy policy structure for things like LED streetlights. And Councilperson Jones, thank you very much for your suggestion. And it's, for myself, that's just a miraculous change of events to include a privacy policy within that innovation roadmap. I think it would just, it can just help things out immensely and make things clear and make what we're all trying to work towards just that much more clear to everyone, as I think you mentioned yourself. So I think it's a very nice idea to do that. Thank you. I had a few words that I wanted to say about the IoT process, but I think I'll wait. And just thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Next item on the agenda is item D2, Internet of Things strategy.
For this, I'd like to welcome to the table Keshav Gupta, who's our IoT lead here in the city and a Fuse Fellow with us, as well as Britt Harder from PwC, who's been our lead consultant on the team working with us to develop the Knight-funded strategy. So if we could pull up the next presentation, I believe I'm turning it over to Keshav. Or maybe I'm turning it over to Britt.
Thank you, Kip. Good afternoon, everyone. Keshav Gupta, Fuse Fellow, Office of Civic Innovation. We initiated our work on developing the first ever citywide Internet of Things strategy about 6 months back. And since then, we have put significant thought into developing a robust strategy to address how the city should approach the upcoming wave of IoT. The city has collaborated with PricewaterhouseCoopers for this engagement. We first developed an understanding of our process and how ready we are, and we did this through interviews and workshops. In parallel, we also launched a track to do some peer city research and did a benchmarking exercise. Finally, we took the design inputs from our department heads through a series of workshops as well. Through the synthesis of these inputs and our own analysis, we have developed the San Jose IoT Guiding Principles, IoT Foundational Building Blocks, and our overarching IoT strategy that is both benefits-driven and people-centric. Our goal for today's discussion is to share the proposed strategy and seek your inputs to help finalize the IoT strategy and this transformation roadmap. We'll be back in fall for the final approval of the IoT strategy. And now I'd like to have Britt walk us through the details of the strategy.
Sure, thank you. I saw a couple of council members put their glasses on. I think you may need them here. There's going to be a few small graphics. I'll try to make it as intelligible as possible so we won't have to read all the fine print. But this is a topic that is both complex and multivalent, and we've worked to make it feasible for the city. So just to start, in terms of IoT, what is IoT? It's the Internet of Things. What is the Internet of Things? It is literally things being mechanized devices speaking to each other over the internet. So it's sensors, actuators, sending data that they're perceiving from the environment, processing it, and then potentially sending it back to other machines to change things. I mean, there's lots of technical definitions. Engineers have other ones that can be even longer and sort of less precise or less helpful. But ultimately, we're talking about machines talking to machines over the internet, and what can that be used for in a city context. So oftentimes, when we start to look at IoT in a city context, there's already a lot that's happening. This is not something that we need to prepare for because we've never done it before. We're already doing it. We've got a lot of IoT applications that are currently in the city and succeeding, whether it's streetlight dimmers that are aware that that something is happening or the sun is setting, whether it's the ability to note sewage overflows. We already have this capability. But you're going to imagine to see more and more and more of this. And so our challenge is really twofold. The first, how can we prepare for more and more and more while still succeeding? And also, how can we make it so that we are able to process this effectively so that we don't get overwhelmed by the management of more and more and more. We've really got a lot of individual solutions. We're looking to be able to manage them all collectively and successfully. So I'm going to flip from here. This is really the sort of the kind of IoT that you'll see, that you're aware of, that you can touch. But that really behind the scenes, there's a skeleton. So, if you see the sensor, if you see the sensor in the street, if you see the streetlight change, what does it take to make that a success, to make that work. And so for that, we really see two big pieces. There's the pure technology, and then there are the policies and support functions to make it a success. And that's really one of the central challenges of IoT, is making sure that that your technology works and it's up to date, and that your policies are supporting it and delivering the best outcomes for residents. And so from a pure technology perspective, I mean, the IoT, as we just said, there are sensors out in the world, they're sensing things, they're sending information over the internet, it's going to some big chunk of computers somewhere in the digital layer, it's getting sliced and diced, and the signal is routed, and you determine what to do, and then it goes back out to those sensors to change. So that's the technology stack. You'll see it, whether it's a flood sensor, prioritization for ambulances, whatever. It's got to go through some series of steps like that. And wrapping around that are these big, important concepts to make sure the city can succeed. Both cybersecurity, making sure that nobody is getting into those devices who shouldn't be there. Digital privacy, making sure that what those devices are gathering is appropriate, is appropriately managed. We're seeing that in the news a lot. Additionally, from a city perspective, funding. Who is paying for this? How, where is it coming from? And what's being traded in response? And ultimately, up at the top, that tangible improvements for residents. We're not doing IoT just to do IoT. We're doing IoT to make lives better. And so making sure that we're staying focused there. So to summarize that, really, the city is already doing IoT. We have opportunities to do more of it, both in terms of hardware that's already there and new applications. So we could be doing it better. One thing you're going to hear me go into a little bit after this is this concept that IoT is immature everywhere. There is no perfect city who has solved this in a long-term, sustainable, and secure way that we can copy one for one. So we're all on a journey together. But there are certainly cities that have experimented or on longer journeys, and we can learn from them and where they are. And there's going to be an importance to act now because the technology is changing, and to make sure that we are able to take a proactive rather than reactive stance to these topics. Taking just a short click into some of those applications. I said you'll see a couple of solutions here. Again, why are we doing IoT? We're doing IoT to make city services better, make lives better.
Those aren't big belly trash cans, are they? Okay, good. We just wanted to check. Thank you.
But are they Wi-Fi connected? Yes. Yeah, okay.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. So, so what we're seeing here is really a few things. We've talked about making lives better, and that involves efficiency, it involves cost savings, it involves being able to do city services more effectively. A couple of examples you see are these trash cans. Some obviously perhaps more successful than others, but that they're able to, by sending information, save emissions, save resources, only be picked up when they need to be. Similarly, another emerging idea is this concept of predictive maintenance, that solving a problem, particularly a road problem, before it happens would both save money and reduce congestion. And so how can we use sensors and data and analytics to get ahead of that? So these are the kind of things, this is the sort of prize that's out there. The point of these is not to say, we think you need these two applications, but to look at some of the value and some of the examples that other cities are gaining from IoT. So in terms of how we compare, you're going to see, we looked at a lot of really leading cities. And you're going to see them all come up here. We looked at them in terms of technology. What sort of stuff do they have out in the streets, and how advanced is it? How much of it do they have? We also looked at it in terms of governance. How do they take care of that? What is that? What's that wrapper around the technology stack? And so you'll see a whole bunch of cities there, and they're moving through, with some more mature than others, but as we said, really nobody's got this exactly right. You'll see particularly the most advanced cities tend to be emerging Asian economies who have more central control, and so that they're going to be able to move quickly in a way that maybe we wouldn't. San Jose, and I don't want this to alarm you, we're actually doing quite well, and we have a lot going on in terms of success. There are a lot of things we do very well, but that we do see we have the opportunity against some of the leaders to continue to evolve both that technology stack, what we have there, as well as how we look at it. So one of the things that we looked through was this concept of principles. As we get started trying to organize ourselves on IoT and going on this journey, what is the core of what are our North Stars? How do we make sure that each application, each consideration, each step is moving us in the right direction? So we worked through a series of stakeholders, discussions, research to come towards these guiding principles for our IoT. And that there are a number of them, I won't read each one of them, but that at their core they're about making sure that the city is safe, the city is successful, that we're continuing on a journey and we're improving services, protecting people while continuing to innovate and move along. We don't want to be so conservative that no progress is made, but at the same time making sure that we're keeping people at the center. One of the other places within IoT that you might look is, so why do we need to focus on this? What does it do for us? And ultimately, what it is, IoT can be an enabler of city services and of the Smart City Vision collectively. The Smart City Vision is a view towards what the city can be and what it should be, that IoT can be one of the things that helps us get there. It can deliver improved efficiency, as we talked about. It can deliver the kinds of great resident services that they would expect so that they can have more information and more real-time data. It can help us respond more quickly to emergencies. That these are the kind of things that IoT can do for us if we allow it to succeed. So we've looked at this, we've now looked across sort of what is IoT, what is the technology, what can it do for us, where are some of the value that we can get elsewhere, and what we're going to look at now is some questions of why do we need to tackle this now? The city has a number of priorities. And one of the first ones is that technology is at a tipping point right now. We see there, you're seeing this hockey stick graph. This is going to be the year in which IoT devices surpass mobile devices. You're just going to see more and more and more of this. More and more devices, more and more data. You'll see more in the environment. And so what the city needs to be preparing for is how to process that. How can we get ready not just to have the applications we have today, but for a flood of applications in the future? What are the processes? What are the data forms? So that we can manage that wave and ride that wave. Ultimately, if we tackle this now, we see there's some value to be had, particularly around cost savings, that some specific applications may be able to support some of the budget issues in place. The community is becoming increasingly interested in this, particularly around privacy and the privacy around IoT. So we feel there's an opportunity to be responsive there. And ultimately, as the capital of Silicon Valley, we want to be not among the leaders, but the leader, fulfilling that promise, making sure that our companies and our residents see the city as responsive. So where we're going to pivot from here is start looking into what are some of the strategy recommendations and how do we think we should tackle this. We really looked at the fact that there's lots of technology out there. There's really that skeleton we need to build behind it, and that if we get that skeleton right and we get it right now, we can prepare to gather a lot of the benefits that we've seen. So one of the ways we went around this was doing a number of deep technical workshops with individual departments, looking at external experts, cities, to say, so what are the big challenges with IoT? When we think out into the future, when we imagine there being all of those new devices, what are some of the big challenges, and how can we make sure to address them successfully? Sort of looking down the left side, you'll see one of the big ones is this question of data fragmentation. If we just put up individual solutions, individual devices that work on completely separate systems, we'll be overwhelmed by trying to manage them, and they'll never be able to speak to each other to get the kind of value from that data that's possible, to be able to unlock those new services and improvements. Digital privacy and cybersecurity they're so prominent in the news, so prominent in considerations. You'll see that you've seen some other cities have those challenges very recently. These are things that we really, as we go forward, we feel that need to be locked down. Also, this question of what do we do with the fact that the applications are not yet mature? a lot of IoT is still emerging. You're getting new ideas. There are many companies providing new solutions that may be unproven. How do we navigate in a world where not all the technology is mature, but again, we want to be capturing that value and staying in a leading position? So in terms of design considerations, we see there, we can address these, that there's the opportunity to organize ourselves around a data strategy so that we're processing that data effectively. This is something I believe has been spoken to with this committee earlier. Making sure that there's a united front and repeatable principles in terms of both cybersecurity and privacy. As we start looking at how to be able to gather that data and integrate it, there's an opportunity to look at some sort of software platform to make sure that we're able to gather all the data and put it in one place. And then from that solid base, we'd be able to experiment with the individual use cases to be able to look at whether we would want to do something around floods, around traffic, around cost savings. We were able to, that we can then experiment from a solid base. And again, looking back at that technology stack, we've got the entire flow that we need to work through. And the 4 real areas we see there needing to focus, as we said, you saw them right off the last slide, is cybersecurity. We feel like we need to make sure that that technology stack is secure. If it's not, we put ourselves at risk, we put our progress at risk, we put the trust of the residents at risk. Similarly with privacy, we feel like in order for this to thrive going forward, as we see more and more of these applications, we want to make sure that our digital privacy is being managed in a way that we are comfortable with and is repeatable and consistent across the city. That third thing that we see as being an important foundation before we experiment with use cases is this concept of a data strategy, making sure that as data is gathered from these devices, we know what we're doing with it, we know where it goes, and we're getting the best out of it. Similarly, that we've got some kind of software to make sure that data is all coming into the city cleanly and can be spoken to in an orderly way. This is an emerging area around software, but we think there's opportunity here. So if we put these building blocks in place, that would give the kind of solid foundation that then would allow for the leadership and use case experimentation. So in terms of the strategy itself, if we had to summarize it all in one place, what we see as being what would be a leading position, what would allow the city to move forward and meet its own ambition would be first, getting those basics right, that data strategy, the software platform, digital privacy, and cybersecurity, making sure that we can build on those, that they're in place, and that we, as we go forward. The second is making sure that we're using our partners and our people successfully, that they know what's happening and that they're engaged, both the city departments, each of whom is ultimately going to be responsible for some of this hardware, as well as the broader community where a lot of our power lies within San Jose. And then from there, that's when we're able to innovate, pilot, succeed, deliver value. You'll see some of these areas here: public safety, mobility, cost savings and facility management, environment, water savings, making sure that we're only watering when we really need to be. That these are the applications that we want. These are the applications that we can see, and these are those applications you saw back on that first slide out in the street. So now once we have the solid foundation, we can be as ambitious as we want to be here. And ultimately, that allows us to deliver those benefits to residents, to make them safer, to make the city more efficient and more effective, deliver those same services better, and as well as innovate, deliver new services and more delightful services. So if we had to add it all up, how to take on IoT, this would really be it. Build a solid base, make sure that we're using people as well as we can and that they're comfortable, and then deliver services on top of that. In terms of how to go forward from there, we see there are sort of a series of opportunities, how we might tackle this. In terms of IoT strategy, if we're talking about public safety, maybe that's our street lights. That allows us to keep people safer. That allows us to reduce issues. Similarly with congestion, if we're using traffic counters, we can figure out where individuals are going, sequence lights, deliver services to make sure that we're flowing smoothly and safely. From a facilities management perspective, we're making sure that we're watching our assets, watching our energy, so that we can then deliver improved facility services. And finally, from an environment, those waste bins may allow us to deliver improved recycling volumes. Ultimately, the point here is to say that the point of IoT is not to put devices out, but to deliver better outcomes. We want people to be more mobile. We want less waste to landfill. We want our citizens to be safer. And so these are the kind of devices that can do that. How do we move forward from here? How do we get going on this strategy that we put forward? So there's really two phases that we see. The first is we're going to need a little bit of stand-up to get those things in place, those building blocks that we talked about. And from a lot of that's already in place. We believe it can be done using existing staff and existing budgets to make sure that we're putting some of those building blocks in place in the first year or two. Ultimately, beyond that, once that foundation is in place, but we want to be innovating, delivering use cases, partnering with other departments to make sure that they're finding the kind of customized benefits delivering solutions that we see IoT as being able to deliver. And we don't think that needs to wait until year 2 to get started. We've broken these up because they're two different tracks of work, but not because one of them can't start until the other is in place.
All right, so for me, in closing, this is sort of the one-page summary of where we think we should be headed, and we'll open it up in just a moment for your perspective, discussion, and feedback. The heart of everything we do is aim to provide benefits for our residents, for our businesses, and for our visitors. We really do think that getting the basics right on these 4 building blocks is crucial. In addition to them being building blocks, we feel that these are probably the most centralized part of what we'll do in IoT. So if I'm Parks and Rec and I'm using IoT to improve my irrigation of parks, I don't want to have to reinvent cybersecurity from ground zero, worry about digital privacy from ground zero, figure out what smart city platform and what data strategy I want. I'd like to have at least a core of that in place for me so that departments can continue to be free to be innovative and pioneering in their use of IoT, but be assured that they have some of the basics there embedded for them and that we don't end up with 27 different vertical solutions that don't talk to each other. We do see us prioritizing use cases which are very important to the city and also where we think that the still emerging technology is probably more mature. Places like traffic management, places around the street smart lighting control, things like irrigation control and building energy systems are all mature and are all good bets for us in terms of our city's investment. And then again, back up at the top is we really want to make sure that as we're doing this safely, the end result is more effective and more efficient services being delivered to our residents, our businesses, and our visitors. And in some cases, completely new services that we hadn't conceived of or couldn't do without the benefit of this extra data layer. So let me stop right here and give you the chance to weigh in on where we are, where we aren't with this, so that we can do the next iteration of the strategy development with your feedback and direction in mind. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kip. Councilmember Davis.
Thank you. I really appreciate this presentation because for a whole year on this committee, I've been trying to figure out where we're going with this whole IoT thing, and this really helped lay it out for me. I like the graphics, you guys know that. The first question I have is, I appreciate wanting to get the basics right, but a couple of slides back, you talked about how delivering better outcomes is the whole purpose of doing this, but we haven't had a discussion yet about what are the outcomes that we want to deliver better using technology. And it seems to me like getting the basics right isn't the first step. It's figuring out where we want to be. That is the first step. And I'm a little bit confused about getting the basics right and then engaging stakeholders, when I think that engaging stakeholders should be before or concurrent with getting the basics right, because we need to talk about what are the pain points, what are the outcomes that we want to improve on. And to Kip's point about the the parks using the water sprinklers or the sensors, they're already doing that. They're already starting to do that. I just had a conversation with Angel on Monday about planning for that in my parks budget. So I guess I'm not real clear on, I really like the graphic, but it doesn't indicate that we're actually starting where we should be starting, which is with the end in mind.
Good point, and we actually kind of debated back and forth on just this aspect of the graphic, because these aren't a 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do 1, then I'm going to do 2, then I'm going to do 3. These are 1, 2, 3 that we do together, because we really can't. We don't want to make a cybersecurity policy an abstract of the understanding of the actual technology and the actual hardware. We certainly don't want to launch on a case study without actually engaging with the departments on what are their pain points. So I think the irrigation is a good example. Was in conversations with Angel and some others today about that. We're having a huddle kind of cross-departmentally so that we'll let them continue to lead in that, but we're going to wrap around some support for them so that they are informing the way we do the global cybersecurity and the platform work. But you're right, these are 3 processes that interrelate with each other and should happen at the same time. So we'll work on how to graphically display that. We've had about 6 different iterations we've tried, and clearly this one didn't work.
No, it's fine. I understand how difficult it is to, I mean, this is really high level conceptual stuff, and the graphics do help me process it, although I will say it takes me some time. So I always feel like I'm 2 slides behind you, and I have to have the slides up on my iPad kind of to process the information. So I appreciate that these things are happening concurrently. I would like to have more knowledge as you go along about what the expected outcomes are that you decided on, but also what did you think about and then discard, and why, and who was involved in those decisions?
I think that's really rich. Part of what we're doing right now is we are identifying and vetting different use cases. And so I think if I'm following your request correctly, I think it would be useful to bring and make transparent some of that work, and also give you the opportunity to weigh in on the evaluation criteria and the direction on that. Again, we're hoping that eventually we'll think of IoT the way we think of electricity. It'll just be what you do and what you put in buildings and infrastructure. So I think it'd be particularly helpful as we sort through these first use cases to get your feedback on if we're headed in the right direction. So we'll bring that work back sooner rather than later, perhaps when we bring the strategy back in the fall and say, here's our first cut. We looked at 37 use cases. These were our criteria. This is where we are. This is what we discarded. And then we can get down into some of those details, which I think at this point are actually useful once we have the context of the strategy.
Yeah, and to your point about the use cases, I would even go one step back from that about what are the expected outcomes, or what are the desired outcomes that you're hearing from departments, and where can technology help improve those outcomes, and where is the technology not there yet, or it ends up not being a technological issue.
Thank you, got that.
Okay, thanks. And then I guess the other kind of, it was kind of way back, but you were talking about evolving a platform-centric approach, and I'm not real clear on how we can do that when the technology is so fragmented and new.
And neither are we entirely.
Okay,
but
good.
we have
Thank
we've been in conversations with some global partners who are making attempts at putting together a platform approach. So one of our thoughts is that if these conversations come together, we will pilot one of these platforms and see how it works out. There is a bit of a holy grail quality to this at the moment, because whoever does this well is going to capture a lot of value. So nobody has got something out there that's perfect, but we're in conversation with some folks, and if that conversation goes further, we'll bring together a pilot partnership and run them through the paces to see if this works. And if it doesn't, it will inform then where we go out for solicitations for another pilot. If it does work, it maybe put us on a path for a longer term partnership.
Okay, and that's really useful. And just kind of the thought that came up while you were talking about that, Kip, is I just came from Caltrain meeting from this morning, and I know that we had to do positive train control, and the technology when we originally, or when they, before I was on the board 5 years ago, had the RFPs, the technology has evolved, and we had to, terminate a contract with our original supplier, and luckily, thankfully, the second proposal from 5 years ago, their technology had advanced to a place where it was actually now acceptable to us, and it wasn't back then 5 years ago. And so we were constrained at that time, and now we had to terminate the contract for other reasons, but now there's kind of some of these changeover costs that we have to incur to get a better technology or a better solution. And I guess I'm just kind of talking out loud that one of the risks about us trying to be on the forefront of this is that we'll have those kind of changeover costs that we have to incur because we're not waiting for the technology to mature. And then how do we build that into our systems and our budgets?
You're absolutely correct. There's this concept of path dependency, right? That you'll pick something and that kind of sets the course for a lot of other things. And if you pick wrong, that can be a substantial rip out and rework. That's a very real risk in any emerging technology or any emerging market. As somebody who had a Palm Pilot and thought they were really cool, right? I
had one.
Yeah, and that's fine if you're an individual. You just get the next thing up. But if we gotten 50,000, our 6,000 city employees Palm Pilots, and then they were obsolete, we'd be in that situation. So there is very much this risk with that, and that's again part of what we realize is we are going to be in an environment where these technologies are going to be at different states of maturity, and that we're going to, on some of them, they're going to be good for 4 years, and then we're going to pull something out and something's going to leapfrog over it. So part of what we're trying to evaluate with the help of PwC and others is where are those areas where the technology is mature enough that it's a sound bet and going there, and then where it isn't, being clear that we're in an innovation space and not necessarily laying down tracks for everything everywhere until we have a sense of where that path dependency will lead. But there's going to be some of that, and you've put your finger on what is one of the biggest risks from my opinion, within the IoT space, is making the wrong bet on a technology that's good, but just doesn't become the standard or gets eclipsed when there's innovation in another area that you couldn't foresee.
And thank you. And so being really clear about that when we're talking about what we deploy, each time we talk about what we deploy would be really helpful, and what the risk is in having to incur those changeover costs, or what the constraints might be if we choose now versus waiting.
Right, as the mayor said at the Route 50 event on innovation, it's not about complete risk avoidance or risk just embracing all the risk. It's about risk management. Right. And so part of what I think we'll want to do as we bring together these initial case studies that evolve into pilots is do a pretty good risk management kind of section of them, and let you know which ones we think, no, these are just normal procurement sure bets, this is fine, versus these are the risks associated with this going forward.
Right, great, thank you.
Mayor?
Thanks. I just want to pick up where Councilmember Davis left off. And the good news, I guess the good news and bad news is that we're not the earliest adopters, right? We've got a lot of cities in front of us. And I can recall at that innovation circle, and you gave a great presentation there, Kip. We heard from a lot of private sector folks who advocated that we buddy up with the Singapores and Barcelonas of the world, and I think there's a great value in that. And if nothing else, just to really identify the real use cases and separate the wheat from the chaff here, because I see a lot of applications of IoT out there that just don't make any sense to me. It just seem like generate a lot of heat and not very much light. And even, as I think about some of the ones that make sense for other cities, like Kansas City has that road maintenance program using data analytics. And I think, we just know that with the amount of money we have for roads right now, if the pothole's larger than a Volkswagen, then we spend money and fill it. And we don't really have the luxury of thinking about maintenance in that way. So that application really wouldn't do anything for us, right? We're just not. So if nothing else, it seems like having relationships with other cities to really identify the use cases early that we really want to invest in would be really valuable, because I know we're all kind of grappling with that. And we've, somewhat reflected, I think, in our negotiation with AnyCom that there are a lot of options out there, and just trying to find the right ones that actually have impact for our residents isn't self-evident. And so, to what extent does it make sense for us to try to formalize relationships with some of these cities that are way out there, so we can really learn from what they've done?
I think there's a real there there. This work is being done at the city level more than any other place, and there is, as you've seen, a relatively short list of those cities that are in the lead. Many of them have reached out to us, or we've reached out to them informally. Many of the networks around smart cities are vendor-funded or vendor-led networks, and they have their value. You get to learn a lot about different things that people might sell you, but they're not necessarily geared to be a forum where you kind of can sit down and have open, candid, direct city-to-city conversations. So I think there's a lot there, and I think in addition to sort of one-off, there's some opportunities for some convenings and some gatherings and some conversations around those. So I think we can put that on part of the Smart City Roadmap work as to how to build that community better. And I know there are folks in your office who do that kind of networking and outreach really well. So we'll probably lean back on you when we do that. But far from being a junket, I think there's a lot pragmatically to learn from the Singapores and the Barcelonas of the world, and even the Kansas Cities, to give them their credit.
Well, we'll book our tickets to Barcelona before Kansas City. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate also your explanation about sort of the 1, 2, 3 not being purely sequential, because I can imagine there are opportunities for us to figure out a lot of things about platform and privacy and cybersecurity while we're piloting. And I'd hate to think we're going to stop doing the piloting while we're waiting to get it all right. I mean, I think we have to be tolerant with the fact that we're going to only be able to put together a Chevy cybersecurity policy until we learn enough to be able to put together a Cadillac. And I also suspect that there are applications and use cases where, cybersecurity in the context of a IoT that helps our parks department figure out how much to water lawns is probably not. There's not nearly as much risk there as, say, a payments system out of a parking meter. But with the look on your face, Kip, I'm guessing you're thinking that there are some bigger risks that we're not seeing.
I just happen to be kind of professionally paranoid on this front, right?
Understood,
and so
right.
the ability for malicious actors, whether or not there's actually a financial gain for them, is always something that I'm concerned of. I think in terms of financial risks, you're absolutely right. Payment and money are much higher, but somebody who wants to turn all the water sprinklers on to have a good time, we want to make sure we've got them sewed down as well. Okay. And I think one of the mistakes on some of the earlier devices, for example, without getting into too much details, because we won't run this risk, is things like having the firmware all have the same password on them, right? All that kind of stuff in the early stage, we want to make sure that regardless of whether it's a high-value system or not, we've got some of those basics.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the clarity that you've been able to offer us and figuring out how we move forward.
Thank you, Mayor Lund.
Thanks. If somebody were to bring back the Palm Pilot graffiti handwriting, they would make a killing today, I think, with all the tablet stuff.
And the BlackBerry buttons.
I just want to add my 2 cents to this. I try to consider myself, as tech savvy as a regular consumer, non coder can be, and I don't think the term or the concept of IoT has really entered the mainstream consciousness yet. We know about Wi-Fi, we know about GPS and LTE maybe, but IoT, people have the Nest thermostats and whatever, but they don't really understand the concept yet. And I think it's actually a boon, a benefit to us being behind all these other cities, because we kind of get to see their mistakes and outdo them. call it like a Marshall Plan for San Jose, but but I guess I don't want to. Well, I guess what I'm not clear on is all these applications. You know, I in my own research of IoT and what a smart city potentially is, I look at these websites and, you know, we got smart trash cans and we have like, you know, light poles that can like, you know, hear gunshots and like all this stuff. But I do know, and we have people who come and express like a fear of or a downside to these applications. And I guess what I'm saying is I don't necessarily know what the menu is. So, you know, Councilmember Davis and you were saying about meters for sprinklers, and I heard a podcast the other day about Chicago doing something out in their streets where they can kind of measure traffic patterns and see if, like, you know, what part of the cities have hard stops when pedestrians cross the street for some reason, and they can know which street intersections are the most dangerous for some reason. And so they're unlimited, seemingly, applications of a smart city, and we don't have unlimited resources. So what is the menu for San Jose in terms of smart city? Is it like garbage cans that will tell you to go empty me because it's full now and will send a signal? Is it, you know, the network that will allow for autonomous vehicles to be driving around? Like, smart city, yes, but it's a very blurry concept generally. And if we want the public buy-in, we should, you know, at least get the council members to understand it and also do the public outreach to say this is potentially the future of the city of tomorrow, and here are the possibilities. Here's the menu. Let's pick what we want to go down, because I think, you know, there's a lot of cool things that we can do with it, and I just don't know. I can't really see concretely what that is. I can say, go forth and conquer the future, but I don't know concretely what that entails. So.
Yeah, I think I'll stitch that together with Councilmember Davis's comment and request, which is let's bring the transparency back on the use cases, the technology, and the approach, because there are a seemingly unlimited number of use cases that range from the extremely practical to the bizarre, and so we want to be making sure that we're selecting the right set to start with, and we'll bring that back with you and make that transparent to both you and the community on what those technologies that we're selecting and how we're going to be approaching learning about them. Because as you get into this, yeah, there are, and this is why we have cybersecurity and digital privacy as those two basic bars. There's some things that are scary about the potential of this technology, and we want to make sure that we do this in a way that continues to engender the public trust and continue to make sure that we are deeply respectful of people's privacy and rights as we're doing this. And I think it's incumbent upon us to bring that back transparently to you and to acquaint you with what we think are the potential wins, and get your feedback on that.
Actually, as someone who was proud to be to sport an Apple Newton, so I thought I was the coolest kid in town.
Those were cool. Yeah.
They were. Just a couple of points. One is that I totally understand the strategy about getting the basics right, but I also understand the points that were made about not having that hold us back, you know, almost like analysis paralysis. But we all have to understand, and anybody who's been around technology has to understand that you can do all the research in the world, you can do all the case studies, you can talk to all the cities, and you still might bet on beta versus VHS. And that's just the nature of technology.
It was a better technology.
It was better technology, but it didn't win as the dominant technology. But I guess the point is that there's no crystal ball with technology, and we might do everything we can, and it still won't be the technology of the future, and we might make a bad bet. But then we have to be able to learn from that and pivot and go in the right direction. But, you know, we just have to get away from, you know, this fear of failure. And I think that, you know, we're in this space, this technology space. It almost runs counter to how government is run, because there's this a fear of failure, fear of making the wrong decision. And when you're in the technology space, there is a probability that you could make the wrong decision, but you have to learn from it. So I just want to make that point. I did have another question around the layers slide that you had, and there's one of the areas that I was interested in is just the amount of bandwidth. If we have a deployed IoT network out there, just the sheer amount of data, bandwidth that would be required. Do you have any kind of just, high-level estimation of what we're looking at?
Well, I'll do it, and then I'll turn it back over to Britt to go into larger context. A lot of it depends, right? Because there are applications, for example, that may just send a couple of bytes of data a day over a cell phone line. There are others that might be continuously streaming high quality imagery, and so a lot of this goes hand in hand with our broadband strategy and our connectivity strategy. So part of what we're going to need to do to take full advantage of IoT is make sure that more and more of the city is connected across different means. But there are lots of different levels of data consumption. The simple way to answer is a lot of data and a lot more, and probably more than we can possibly imagine. The history of data usage and data transmission is that this stuff is going to go up and up and up. Countering that, though, is this notion of edge computing and edge devices, where increasingly a lot of the work can be done by pretty amazing computers out on the edge, right? If this has more computing capability holding up my phone than the space shuttle did, which it does, then clearly some of these edge devices can do a lot of their work internally once we've set them with the right algorithm or the right techniques without having to transmit all that data back to home base. But I'll let Britt add on to that from a more global perspective.
Sure, and I think you're right that the connectivity and the bandwidth is projected to become a bottleneck in the future, but is not traditionally a bottleneck today. And so, as Kip alluded, as more and more applications come online, particularly more and more bandwidth demanding applications like video and audio, live streaming, that's when you're going to see expansions. And so the way cities are dealing with this is in twofold. One, as they said, making sure that they're limiting how much has to go through the pipe via edge processing, because that's projected to be an issue. And then also prioritizing what's most important. If we ever reach a point where we have more demand than we have bandwidth, it will be about highlighting which things go first.
And then the second part of that is just the storage, the sheer amount of storage of that data. We're talking, I just can't even imagine the terabytes of data that would have to be stored and the cost associated with that.
Yeah, and this is where actually some of the privacy concerns and other issues might be in alignment. So, for example, if we realize we want to have some sensors on a street, and let's say we realize the actual use that we need is to determine whether there's a parked car in this space or not. I don't need full streaming video in color that can tell me everything about everything else that's going on. And from a privacy standpoint, I may not want that. So having a sensor that just tells me yes or no, there's a parked car in that area, and that's the only bit of information it transmits back, and that's the only capability that we've powered on in that device, could have benefits in terms of data connectivity reduction, in terms of storage cost reduction, and also in terms of enhancing both perceived and actual privacy, as an example. So we'll have to think through those, which is why, again, the use cases are so important, not just doing cool gee whiz sensors because we can.
Great. And then last question was on the funding. Potential funding models through a tech safety bond. Is that tied to the bond that we're asking staff to come back?
Yeah,
to?
that was a general
Or?
recommendation from PwC as a path forward. So we might tie that to our specific general obligation bond, but that was just one of theirs if you want to elaborate.
Sure. And via the benchmarking that we did of other cities, particularly U.S. cities, a lot of them are deploying their larger and more mature IoT applications using a bond measure, just as a way to essentially acquire the capital on something that they believe has substantial payback. And so we saw bond usage across a large number of cities who did their LED streetlights, for example, but also for other technologies, traffic management in Atlanta, et cetera.
And my hypothesis on this going forward is that, again, kind of like electricity, this will just be something that we do in every piece of infrastructure that we have. We don't have to sit there and say, how are we going to fund electricity when we build a building? We just build it in as part of the cost. So similarly, when we do roads, when we do sewers, when we do new public libraries, we will assume and understand that doing the appropriate level of connectivity, doing the appropriate level of sensors will be part of that built-in, baked-in cost. But it's going to take us a while to get to that, and so in the interim, things like bond funding or additional external partners is going to be important to jumpstart and to build some of the initial platform.
Okay, and then the last question is, on the second grouping, you have P3s, which I know is the new hot buzz acronym. Can you bring back an example in a future presentation, and just some examples of how the P3s have worked?
We could bring one today when we talk to Facebook.
Oh, okay, there you go. All right, well, that's it for my questions, and the mayor had additional comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a quick thank you. First, the Knight Foundation for the $200,000 grant. That was critical to fund this very important work. I want to thank our partners at PwC. Really appreciate your insights. So I want to thank Chef Gupta and Dawn Beckel and Shireen for her help in getting the grant. That was awfully important. So just thank you to everyone.
All right, and thank you, Mayor. Now we have Blair Beekman who wants to speak.
Hi, I need to practice that for as much as I thanked you and how much I meant to thank you for coming up with the ideas of a privacy policy to add to your list of items in the previous agenda. I need to really include the idea that we have to learn how to talk about a public process. That's a very important component to all of this privacy policy talk that you're learning to talk about. And that's going to be, you're going to be focusing on for the next year and how to develop. There has to be a very important component that, this is a public process and the public, I understand you're building, infrastructure, but it's okay to invite the public, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. It is okay. You can trust us. It's just that simple. And with that, it can be that easy to learn steps how to include the public more into this process. And just, I'm working on guidelines. I'm working on all the organizational ideas I always talk about. Like for instance, Deb Davis, I thank you a lot for your ideas about about a smart city platform where people are working all together at this time. I want to be a part of that too. I'm from the community. I'm considered a fool. I'm considered a know-nothing. But yet I want to be a part of it, just for the fun of it, just for the inventiveness and learning and knowledge. And I'm excited by this stuff. And I want to talk to the Knight Foundation myself as a member of the community. And I want to see what their feelings are. And then they talk to somebody, and then they talk to somebody. And then we have a whole process. And I think that's a really important component in how to build our future city is how to invite the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair, but I was still waiting for you to comment on Ireland's big belly trash cans. All right, Roxana Marachi.
Good afternoon. Dr. Roxana Marashi of the Education Committee of the San Jose Silicon Valley NAACP. I'm also an education researcher. I came and spoke at the last meeting. How much time do I have, by the way? 2 minutes, okay. As I sit and listen, I want to thank you for the critical questions that you're asking and the concerns that you have about the rollout of IoT. I look forward to hearing more about the privacy policy, the Facebook Terragraph. I noticed that on the board of the advisory board has all folks in the tech industry, and there isn't anyone from I'll just read them off: Aris, Cisco, Dell, Intel, Orbcom, Rev2, PayPal, and Panasonic. There isn't anyone from academia, there isn't anyone from public health or from the community advising on these issues. There are very serious health concerns with some of the technology that's being rolled out, very serious privacy concerns. I've created a public page. It's at bit.ly/San Jose Smart. I'll be tweeting it, making it public soon in the interest of transparency and the interest of public awareness. I think when concerns come up publicly, they need to be addressed. I encourage you to reach out to the scientists. There's over 180 scientists and doctors from 35 countries who've called for a moratorium on 5G technology. If 5G is part of this IoT, then that needs to be looked into, and it may be a matter of just not connecting the dots of all the different organizations that are following these things. You are the best chance we have at protection, and when these kinds of things happen, I wonder sometimes the folks in power in Flint, if they knew that there was concern about public health issues and they went ahead with the decisions anyway, it ends up putting people in jeopardy. So I just want to make it public that those concerns have been made. I look forward to hearing more about the privacy policy and the Facebook paragraph. And again, concerned about the structure of these things and access to data. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have. So we're on to D3, the privacy policy engagement.
Okay, I'd like to invite down to the podium Erica Garofalo and Rob Lloyd to walk us through our initial cut at how we want to be both developing the policies and engaging our community. With that, I believe I'm turning this over to Erica. Oh, I'm sorry. Also, Shireen is joining us as well. My apologies.
Good afternoon, Mayor, committee members, and members of the public. Erica Garofalo, Data Analytics Lead. The city's current digital privacy policies focus on specific applications. The city's website, the My San Jose application, and our library's patron privacy policy are examples of where the city has taken a service-specific approach to protecting personally identifiable information. And though this approach is not uncommon among peer cities, we recommend having an overarching set of principles to privacy in order to better serve current and future uses of data so that we have a single source of truth to provide governance. Developing a citywide approach to digital privacy will take time, effort, and collaboration with internal and external stakeholders. But user privacy can't wait. By taking an iterative approach, we can pilot use case-specific privacy policies on the road to enacting a broader digital privacy set of principles. The city is poised to embark on several IoT pilot projects that you just heard about, and these may include cameras and other sensing devices in the public right-of-way. These pilots are driving the need to develop a new digital privacy policies because of the rapid expansion in type and quantity of data, as well as new concerns over privacy. Our future smart cities work requires us to have a robust privacy and security foundation upon which to build our platforms. If we're going to deliver on a people-centric IoT approach, as you just heard about, then we need a thoughtful approach to digital privacy. One way we might do this is by focusing on several key use cases to ground truth and validate privacy policies that roll up into an overarching set of principles. We also want to strike a balance between cybersecurity, the public's right to privacy, and the utility of data. The tighter we constrain ourselves on cybersecurity and privacy, the less useful the data becomes. Similarly, if we open the floodgate and allow all data, then we aren't protecting our security or the public's right to privacy very well. So one example of this trade-off occurred during the flood event. flood victims were asked to provide their information for relief assistance, but some residents opted out of having their information shared between relief agencies. When we couldn't share information between service providers, our ability to provide relief assistance was constricted. Part of this equation lies in earning the public's trust about why we are collecting data. The balance of security, privacy, and utility is all part of the conversation that we intend to have with internal, external stakeholders to better understand what works for San Jose.
So last year, when we started to embark on our thinking around IoT and privacy, I engaged the Harvard Law School to help us to start thinking about privacy. So for those of you who have not heard of the Cyber Law Clinic, it provides pro bono legal advice to clients on internet, new technology, and intellectual property. And this effort was overseen by Professor Susan Crawford, who, for those of you who haven't heard of her, she is one of the foremost legal minds in the country. Some of her accolades include serving as special assistant to President Obama on science, technology, and innovation policy, as well as being named one of Time Magazine's most influential minds in tech. So we had the best thinking on our initial cut around privacy, around this privacy policy. And so a team of students overseen by Susan Crawford benchmarked 13 cities around the country on their privacy policies, as well as looked at California statutes for us. And there was a few things that were main themes that came out of this effort. So one is that there really isn't a one-size-fits-all to privacy. So every community needs to build privacy principles and a privacy approach that works for their community. The second is that the process of engagement is as important as the details of the policy. And we've heard from some of our community members here. And I think that, we need to ensure that we take seriously the issue of privacy and maintaining public trust. I think we have a responsibility and, dare I say, an obligation as the largest city in Silicon Valley to help our community and work with them to ensure that we are embracing technology in a way that benefits our residents. The third insight was that it can be very helpful for cities across the country to have a chief privacy officer. It allows for a single point of contact to drive change through an organization around privacy, because as you will hear from Erica in the presentation that follows, a privacy policy isn't a static thing. It's something that is ongoing and needs to be integrated into every data project, into every department in a city, as well as thought through in every contract around technology. So just to give you a sense of the challenge we face, this slide shows a set of cities, not the full set of cities that we looked at, but shows what different cities are doing along different dimensions of privacy. And what you'll see is that no one city has taken the same approach, and that no one city has done this perfectly. You can see that Seattle is best practice on many dimensions, and then other cities show a forward-leaning approach on multiple dimensions. And so what this means is that as we move forward in this effort, we need to bring the best minds onto this issue, engage our community, and continue to iterate and learn throughout the process. Thank you.
So delving into it a little bit, in their research, Harvard identified 4 different approaches to privacy. Each has their relative pros and cons, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. We can use this framework to consider which approach to use in San Jose, or if there's a blend of each that might work best. First, an enterprise-wide approach aims to set up a guidance framework that would apply to all departments and potentially third parties, depending on the structure of the approach. In theory, this approach works best as a North Star, which can be used as a point of universal agreement among stakeholders of differing ideology. Without delving too far into project-specific details, The hope is to institutionalize an approach which is future-proof against fast-changing technology. In practice, it can be challenging to draft an all-encompassing policy that meets the needs of everyone and is still effective. Seattle is on their third iteration, designed now to be an overarching set of privacy principles so that they could find common ground amongst stakeholders. More focused IoT-specific policies are still high level, but can incorporate a more nuanced approach for the ever-evolving nature of IoT. New York City pioneered this approach with their published set of IoT guidelines. In a city with over 50 different agencies and hundreds of thousands of employees, taking on privacy related to IoT was a more practical effort than enterprise-wide. There is also the appeal of testing out the robustness of a privacy policy on a known technology before broadening it to an enterprise-wide approach. The majority of cities interviewed by Harvard take a project-by-project approach, which affords more flexibility in making sure that privacy guidelines are in sync with the technology being used. As new technologies develop, cities can ensure that past approaches don't inadvertently stifle new applications for future development. And lastly, on the international front, there are some cities governed by national legislation. We should note that there is unlikely to be national legislation in the U.S. on this topic in the near term, but there is a potential California ballot measure that is currently gathering signatures. Both the EU's General Data Protection Regulation and the proposed California Consumer Privacy Act ballot measure take a much stronger stance on the public's ability to opt out of having their personal data shared or sold, and both give the public the right to see what data is being collected about them and the request to obtain it. Using an iterative approach, we will engage a cross-departmental working group of inside and outside subject matter experts to review the material from Harvard and develop guiding principles. We will also continue to research how other cities are approaching this issue, especially locally. For example, both Santa Clara County and Oakland have surveillance ordinances governing privacy. And Oakland has taken an additional measure by enacting a privacy advisory commission. Our approach will include engagement with internal stakeholders, with city manager's office, attorney's office, IT, library, and various city departments, including public safety. Will also engage with and solicit the views of the general public, community members, and key organizations such as the ACLU. We recommend using certain priority use cases for piloting focused privacy policies. In learning from these pilots, we can iterate and modify the draft privacy principles and policies. Finally, with approval from the Council, we will implement these principles. As Shireen mentioned, other cities have found that their approach is aided by creating a Chief Privacy Officer role to oversee implementation and governance. Though we do not currently have a plan to hire for this role, this is something that the Council may wish to consider. We will also need to set up a mechanism to monitor the privacy principles for compliance and a plan for periodic refresh to the policies. Given that this is an aggressive timeline and the importance of having an approach to digital privacy, we need you to prioritize this work both through the budget and showing your support during Council priority setting. This work requires significant time, effort, and collaboration to do well. There are many questions we need to consider, and more still that we haven't yet thought of, such as who owns the data, and for how long are we required to store it, and where? Should we have a data monetization strategy? These are complicated questions that require a thoughtful approach. At this point, we are seeking the committee's guidance and input on these questions, our approach, and community engagement. Thank you.
And I'll just close very quickly with, again, appreciation for Shireen, her leadership, working with Harvard to give us an initial cut at how we can begin to think about this. To echo some of the earlier conversations and comments from both the council and the community, we really feel strongly that we've got a lot of smart folks in and around this valley and a lot of people with very important perspectives to engage in. So we fully expect to be creating a robust opportunity for people to engage face-to-face with us, online with us, and seeking out the institutions and individuals around this town and in this valley that can help us think through this together. So we've gone a little bit slower than we wanted. Our slowness, though, is to make sure that we don't just get out ahead of our community on this important conversation. As Erica mentioned, our initial thinking now is that we will want to come out with some specific privacy policies that relate to key things that we want to get going with, but also at the same time in parallel be developing these overarching principles. But that also is up for debate and discussion. So I'll close here with these questions that we know we're going to consider and be considering as we go through the privacy policy, and be open to any questions, comments, or feedback that you might have.
Any, Mayor?
Thank you. I just want to echo the thanks to Professor Crawford and all the HLS students who worked on this, and to Shireen for, again, being able to help us secure resources that we know that it's difficult when we're dealing with a general fund that's got a ongoing deficit, it seems, every year, to find money to do important things like this that inevitably will conflict with priorities like putting cops out on the street and paving roads. And it's really important we find the resources. So thank you for doing it. And I'm guessing they responded to Shireen, because since I graduated from HLS, I don't think they've gotten much of my money. So I appreciate that you were able to to get them to help. I wanted to, I guess, look at really what we can do with the limited resources we have, and then understand what we need to get to do the bigger things. It seems like some of these principal kind of questions are questions that we can, when engaging with our community, come up with a general answer that describes our values and provides a North Star for whatever rules we're going to implement subsequently. That will at least give some guidance. And I'd like to believe that's stuff we can do, and that we're doing now anyway, because we're all thinking about this stuff, and hopefully we're all in communication with the community. I know in a perfect world we'd have a chief privacy officer and a lot more resources here. But it seems to me, for example, that we don't need to take on the question of data monetization, because we know that gets really complex and really messy. And probably that's the kind of thing we'd want to go get a consultant or somebody to help us figure out. And could we just focus on some of the more primary issues, like who owns the data and who gets to see it? And I know I may be oversimplifying when I say all this. I'm sure you guys are thinking, oh yeah, that's easy said, but not easily done. I'm just wondering, are there questions here that we can answer without having to bring in a brigade of professionals?
I believe there are, especially if our default is toward privacy, right? So if for example, with data monetization, we say our default is we're not going to monetize anybody's data, right, then I suspect, and I don't want to speak for anybody in the audience, but I suspect that goes a long way toward both being an easy policy to implement, and something that we can do without having to go through a great deal of expertise on. If we at some point decide to monetize, I think that requires more expertise and engagement and broader discussion. So I think you are right. We can prioritize this work as long as we have the sort of default toward privacy on the things that we don't spend a lot of time on now. I believe that puts us in a strong position. And frankly, this is also one of those things that we also need to do as part of how we do business, right? Anytime that we are dealing with a new technology, we need to be thinking about privacy. It's not an extra or an add-on, it's core to what we should be doing as a city. So right now, we do need to add some more muscle and build into it. We've reassigned Erica and allowed her space and time to lead this, and are bringing together the working group of folks across the department, including some of our sharpest minds in public safety and others, to be engaging and working on this. And so we will do this well without having to add a significant amount of additional resources in our first cut at it.
Okay.
But we'll also understand what it will take to continue to monitor it, and if additional resources are needed in the future. But we're not going to stop and wait for funding to come down from the sky.
Thanks, Kev. And a belated thank you to Erica for spearheading this. I guess my gut says, I know there are a lot of priorities we want to spend money on within the innovation space. And it would seem to me that where there are applications that really do challenge us to have to go get a lot of professional help or bring in resources. You know, there may be companies there that we're partnering with that may be willing to help us with that. But I guess I'll leave that for the specific case as it comes up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. No. I did have one quick question. I did see, I was given a document from the ACLU, which was pretty extensive in terms of the recommendations and the policy positions. Have you seen their report, and do you feel that could be a potential starting point in terms of developing a policy?
We've started our engagement with the ACLU folks. Full disclosure, I'm a card-carrying member of the ACLU. I do believe a lot of what they've got is a really useful point of departure. What we're not going to do with any of our policies, though, is say that any one stakeholder has an absolute lock on the perspective. But you know, a lot of the points that they raise, the structure that they bring about, the concerns that they raise, they've really done a lot of good thinking about this. And I think as somebody for whom it is important to maintain the public trust, we're going to both continue our engagement with them, deepen it, and also take the work that they've done very centrally to the policies that we put back. Our hope is that they'll see that reflected in what they come up with, but there are also a lot of other perspectives that we need to take into account and balance as well.
Great, thank you. And then the last point is Shireen, I guess I need to do a better job of getting Berkeley to volunteer some pro bono hours as well. So.
We'll take them.
All right. So thank you for that report. So next is D4, which is the Facebook Terragraph. Oh, I'm sorry. How could I forget? We have a couple of actually speakers on this. First is Victor Sin. And then Blair, you're right after that. Blair, you're right after that, so you can actually start making your way down.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. My name is Victor Sin. I'm a resident of San Jose and also the chair of the Santa Clara Valley chapter of the ACLU of Northern California. I thank several staff members for meeting with me earlier this month to discuss civil liberties and privacy concerns. I greatly appreciate their efforts, and I look forward to continuing to work with them in the future. I also want to thank Kip for pointing out or using a hypothetical example earlier. He mentioned that, in the case of, let's say, using sensors to detect the presence or absence of a vehicle in a parking space. He approached, he mentioned that, if you collect the right amount of data, in other words, not an excessive amount of data, that will alleviate bandwidth and computational problem. I would also add that, collecting the right amount of data and not an excessive amount of data will also protect civil liberties. For example, using the same example, we are not going to read license plate numbers, right? We only need to tell whether there is or isn't a vehicle in a particular place. So in this scenario, utility and privacy actually go hand in hand. I would also like to point out that privacy and data policy, while important, does not address the question of legal enforcement. An ordinance is legally enforceable. It has the weight of law behind it. It's not clear to me what will happen if a policy is violated. Also, I do not know whether the scope of the proposed policy is broad enough to govern all types of data that have the potential of being used for surveillance. In other words, there may be some types of data that are outside of the umbrella of the smart cities initiatives that can potentially be used for surveillance purposes. So I encourage the council members to take this opportunity to develop and enact a robust and comprehensive surveillance technology ordinance that requires an informed public debate at the earliest stage possible, that requires the City Council to determine that benefits outweigh costs, that requires a thorough surveillance use policy that's legally enforceable.
Thank you, Victor.
Yes, thank you.
Blair?
Well, I guess you guys have, you can see how I try to work, how I talk every week. I try to make something, a softer and easier to understand what Victor is trying to say. Yeah, and that's about it. You know, I just hope there can be ways that can really get excited. You know, we always talk about being excited about innovation, excited about tech. I hope you can learn to become really excited about what's possible with civil rights and civil protection ideas, and how we're at a time of peace, we're at a time of leaving war, we're at a time of leaving 9/11. I just think that opens up an incredible amount of possibilities in how to think and how to work. And so that will be my job, you know, to just talk every week about this and how it makes me feel good and how I feel it's important, and learn to talk with government. And I guess to try to offer, you know, you were using pictures to illustrate, and you have like a diamond to show 4 separate items that you're working on. It looked like a baseball diamond. And what I'm trying to offer is the idea of kind of like a cricket diamond, where a cricket batter, he has the advantage to hit the ball backwards. And that gives you like another option to think about and work with as compared to baseball, where everything's forward. And there's just so many ways to think and shapes, and I just hope you can get excited by the idea of civil rights and civil protections. They're good concepts, and it's a way to develop the We Are San Jose concept that, you know, was very helpful a few years ago, and I think we can add a very important dimension to that thinking that we're all looking for, and we're trying to build a good, sustainable community process. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. You gave me a new way of looking at this. All right, so we're on to D4.
And for this, I'd like to welcome up our partners from Facebook, Yale, Jean, and Ritu. I think will be joining us up here in the box. So today, you're going to hear about an update on one of our most innovative projects, our collaboration with Facebook on Terragraph. The hypothesis was that we could use downtown San Jose as a proving ground for Facebook Terragraph's new millimeter wave technology that provides through-the-air, high-speed backhaul for outdoor Wi-Fi. This technology has never been deployed at scale in an urban environment. We here in San Jose are the first. As such, almost everything about this project has pushed our thinking, helped us to learn, and challenged our processes and approach. As a result, we are changing everything from how we get things up on poles to how we think about the city's role in public Wi-Fi. So before we hear from Facebook, I want to appropriately set expectations. As I have said all along, this is one of our most innovative plays. And as such, we don't know if it will succeed at scale or be the technology that we want to continue to operate. That's what we're learning now. That is what the current engineering trials are for, and the next phase of work around thinking of our strategy. So to be clear, at this point, Terragraph is not ready to replace our wickedly fast Wi-Fi. It is an amazing and exciting technology. But don't take my word for it. You should hear both the details from the Facebook team, and for those of you who are members of the city staff, including council members, have the opportunity to dog food the technology and try it out for yourself. With that, I am pleased to introduce our partner, Yale McGuire, VP for Connectivity at Facebook, to talk you through the work of his team.
Thank you very much, Kip, for the introduction, and it's a real honor to be here, and thank you very much for all those who are in attendance. So if we can switch over to the first slide, I want to give a little bit of background. We started our connectivity efforts at Facebook to help bring the world closer together. Our mission is to develop next-generation technologies that can bring down the cost of connectivity by an order of magnitude, so we can reach the unconnected and increase capacity and performance for everyone else. Our general belief is that everything starts with fiber, but there are no silver bullets to thinking about connectivity for everyone. Our efforts focus on connecting people through the atmosphere, the stratosphere, wirelessly using aircraft. And in cities, we're focused on a project that I'm pleased to share with you today, called Terragraph. a common theme of what will be shared today is the use of a technology called millimeter waves. It is a part of the spectrum that is millimeters in length, and like lasers, you can put capacity where you want it, but without any of the disadvantages that lasers offer, so they can go through clouds, rain, and fog. In the future, the demand for greater bandwidth will only increase. I think this has been discussed a little bit today. And so question we have is, what will dense urban cities, such as some examples here, Sao Paulo, Berlin, Mumbai, look like in the future? So using public data from Cisco's VNI dataset and Wikipedia, we've tried to project for an entire city, and then on a per kilometer squared basis, what are going to be the future needs of those communities in the year 2021. And so you can see on a per square kilometer basis, and this is inclusive of everything, video, Internet of Things, what are the total data needs of a community on a per square kilometer basis? It ranges from about 100 terabytes per square kilometer per month up to 300 terabytes per square kilometers per month. It's huge. And so in order to meet this massive data demand of the future, in very small areas, we believe that extremely dense telecom networks are essential. The existing network infrastructure technology and deployment approaches will be challenged to meet these needs. We believe that people deserve a high bandwidth internet connection and experience no matter where they live. And in order to meet this objective, one of the key challenges is to utilize existing technologies while finding a way to deploy extremely dense wireless networks to meet people's insatiable data demand. To be able to engage with high bandwidth content like video and other types of content in the future. A lot of connectivity, as I mentioned, starts with optical fiber networks that go to the edge. They're a great choice for delivering high bandwidth connectivity, but they do present some challenges when trying to take fiber to every single building or home, including the ones that are listed here. So from a cost perspective, they are very expensive to deploy. There are significant labor costs, as well as the equipment needed to dig up streets to lay fiber, especially when conduits do not already exist. They're longer to deploy. It can require a substantial amount of time to deploy, since laying the fiber takes time, as well as the permitting process to do so. They're also inflexible, and there's potential for damage. So once deployed, fiber networks cannot be quickly expanded or taken in different direction if demand arises or changes. And in certain regions, fiber is often damaged due to a lack of available municipal records, leading to inadvertent fiber cuts. So we see millimeter wave technology as complementary to fiber networks, with some promising advantages over using fiber all the way to individual buildings. One, we believe they're affordable. Millimeter wave infrastructure itself requires what we believe is a lower upfront investment, and deployment costs are lower given the labor that is required to deploy them. We think they have a time to market advantage because they can be planned and deployed quickly before optical fiber broadband connectivity can be made available to those buildings. And then finally, easy to deploy and maintain. And so we've put a lot of effort, as well as other organizations around the world, in looking at advanced network planning processes based on computer vision and artificial intelligence to design these systems to be deployed easily and maintained easily as well. And so we believe overall that millimeter wave wireless networks are an important complementary technology to optical fiber technology. It's a step towards looking at the future. As Kip mentioned, this is technology that is the cutting edge. There's still many challenges that have to be overcome to figure out how this technology can be deployed and deployed at scale. So I'd like to walk through some of those. The first is the infrastructure costs. I did mention that there's an opportunity to make this affordable, but we believe that there still is work to make sure that the costs of hardware and off-the-shelf components are as low as possible. The second is around deployment expenses, and this is where partnerships with municipalities are very important to try to utilize existing infrastructure to deploy those off-the-shelf components, and street furniture is one way that we think is possible for doing that. Second is installation. Really want to minimize, miniaturize, and automate that equipment so that it can be deployed as quickly and inexpensively as possible. And then the other is spectrum, and trying to manage that. And we're focused with this project on unlicensed spectrum, but we do believe that in almost every deployment of thinking about wireless broadband in the future, it's going to be a combination of unlicensed and licensed band technology. And because of this focus on unlicensed technology, Terragraph is our big bet and what we hope will be a next important step in the evolution of wireless backhaul. It is a 60 gigahertz multi-node wireless backhaul system designed to deliver gigabit speeds to dense urban areas at a fraction of the cost of fiber. Most recently at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona in February, I was there myself, we were excited to announce our upcoming Terragraph field trials with Telenor in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and with Deutsche Telekom in the Budapest area of Hungary. But today, I'm really excited to focus on our first Terragraph field trial that's already underway right here in San Jose. And working in close partnership with the city of San Jose, Facebook is currently undertaking one of the most advanced millimeter wave testbeds in the world, combining our homegrown advanced mesh networking architecture with technology used in Facebook's own network infrastructure. So one of the exciting things is that we can look at a picture. This is comes from Apple Maps or Google Maps, and we can actually overlay the network that we've worked on together. So each one of those little nodes, little circles, represents a node in the network, and the green lines are showing all the links that exist in the Terragraph network in the city of San Jose. And so one of the goals in thinking about deploying a citywide scale network is thinking about an analogy of the sun. And I like to think about wireless in this way. We want no dead spots. We want the sun to shine everywhere. And the same thing is true for wireless. We want wireless to be everywhere, such that no matter where people are, or no matter where something is, if it's an Internet of Thing, we want there to be connectivity. And so with this network that we've built, we see this as a possibility for a future to be bright everywhere. So the traditional model is to pull fiber to every building, to every pole in the city. And so we wanted to extend this fiber wirelessly to avoid that. It's a simple concept, but deploying this at scale in a city has never been done before. It's designed to be at consumer level pricing, and it's custom designed by Facebook, but we are working with a whole ecosystem of partners, OEMs, and mobile network operators to make sure that this technology can make it into the world at scale. So just a little bit about the technology. It uses a portion of the millimeter wave at 60 gigahertz. The amount of bandwidth that's available is 12 to 25 times higher than Wi-Fi frequencies. Wired connections that come from fiber move data from the internet to a few points that you can see here in a geographic area. The data is converted into 60 gigahertz frequencies for wireless delivery across the city. And in this deployment, there are actually Wi-Fi access points used to connect to end devices, such as a smartphone that I have in my hand, and I've actually connected to the network using this specific phone. And we call that the access layer. So the overall benefit is the network reach with this technology, fiber-like speeds of using this 60 gigahertz network. So a little bit of background around the project and our collaboration. Terragraph is a demonstration project intended to test gigabit backhaul technology in a dense urban city. It's a 3-year DPA that began in January of 2016. In terms of the planned deployment, which is now complete, We completed our deployment of approximately 500 sectors covering nearly 3 square kilometers, which was planned in the downtown corridor. Recently, we completed what we call our engineering validation testing, or EVT, which is a validation of the performance of Terragraph operating at scale. And to do this, we evaluate the performance with a variety of mesh topologies, real-world deployments. This is not a perfect grid. No city is a perfect grid, and so we have to make sure that in this mesh that it works as intended. And then we track performance in the real-world operating conditions with traffic, rain, varying temperatures, all these things that in principle could impact the performance of this network. And we track network availability so that we can improve the network conditions of that system. So this work for our EVT is now complete. In addition, the learnings that we have obtained from this network have made into contributions to the IEEE. There is a standards activity that is happening called 802.11ay. It is a 60 gigahertz version of Wi-Fi that builds upon the current standard called 802.11ad. And Facebook has made extensive contributions of engineering, deployment learnings, and testing work to this standard. And so far, they have now been accepted in draft form. And so now we're moving into the next phase of user traffic testing, where we test Terragraph as backhaul technology for Wi-Fi service delivery. We have user testing with city employees that started, and Facebook engineers are tracking performance of the network for figuring out ongoing improvements. And so as far as next steps, we are working with the city on continued testing and optimization of the network. The city is working on its Wi-Fi strategy and is evaluating Terragraph as a backhaul solution for municipal Wi-Fi. Facebook will partner closely with the city as we continue to evaluate performance and the user experience. So just to close, this has been a wonderful partnership with the City of San Jose, and I really want to thank Kip and his staff and everybody here. I believe that municipalities like the City of San Jose can play an extraordinary role in connectivity for all people. Facebook and the city have established a 3-year partnership. It's been a model engagement of a public-private partnership. There's been deep collaboration between our teams, which has resulted in our building out of the largest 60 gigahertz network that likely exists in the world. We've benefited tremendously by learning about real-world challenges and solutions by deploying this technology for the first time in industry. The world benefits by sharing what we have learned, and together we have recently released a white paper to educate cities and service providers on learnings for deploying an urban dense network. We thank the city for its leadership, and we look forward to the continued collaboration.
So you can see why we are excited to be working with Yale and his team at Facebook. Their intellect, their energy, and their passion are infectious. I want to give a particular shout out to Ritu Sharma, who's here, who is the overall program manager, as well as Gene Page, who is the lead on San Jose Terragraph, as well as to our own teams in Public Works, Jeff Lee and many others, DOT, IT, Ed Kim in particular, who have really been thinking differently about how we work. And just in closing, I did mention we've been dogfooding the system with our employees. I was reminding that that is not actually a normal English word. Dogfooding is the way that we talk about trying out a new product before it's been released. I prefer the French version, which is drinking your own champagne, but since we're government employees, we'll stay away from the alcohol and go back to dog fooding. So as Yale mentions, our next steps are to figure out how we operationalize this, including appropriate privacy policies for community users. As we look forward to these completions and these next steps, we know that as a city, we need to formulate both a strategy around Terragraph and a citywide intentional Wi-Fi strategy. The strategy should pose and answer such questions as what is our role as an outdoor Wi-Fi provider? What is our business model? How do we operate and maintain the system at scale? what should our privacy policy be? We'll be working with Facebook to inform the development of the strategy, but ultimately how we decide to approach it is our responsibility as a city. And then finally, in closing, I really do want to echo Yale's comment about the fruitfulness of this partnership. We certainly feel we've benefited from a little bit of the kind of the pixie dust of Silicon Valley rubbing off on us. But I think also, if I could be so bold, especially as Facebook has shifted their mission to focus more about creating good in the real world, we found that this is a perfect place and city to do that. So we continue to offer ourselves beyond Terragraph as a living laboratory to think about some of the problems and possibilities that greater connectivity provides. And you'll see over time some of those begin to come forward and come out as we mature those ideas from ideas into pilots. So I really do want to appreciate this partnership and that it goes beyond simply deploying a cool new technology in our downtown, which is super cool, but goes deeper into what I think is exactly what a public-private partnership should be, mutual benefit to each of us and ultimately to our citizens. So with that, I know many of the questions will be for Facebook and Yale. I'll close here, and we are open to any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Kip, and you were correct. That was a great example of a P3. So good job. Even though dog fooding is just a term I'm not going to pick up. You have a lot of good ones, but that's not one of them. Anyway, Councilmember Davis.
Thank you. Thank you, Kip, for mentioning the privacy issue. Since I haven't completed, I have to admit, I haven't, even though I'm on the committee, I haven't completed my login information yet. It's apparently a multi-day process for me. I keep starting it and getting interrupted. I haven't read the privacy policy for the employees to be trying it out. What is the current privacy policy while we're, I'm not going to use the term dog fooding, while we're alpha testing this?
Yeah, that is the information we included to the employees essentially covers the privacy policy. We do not at this point have a separate formal privacy policy for Wi-Fi use, so that agreement is intended to give people a sense of what the privacy is. So the data that's coming through is being used by Facebook to do the engineering tests on. We're not planning to share that with anyone else or monetize it beyond that at all. And so our intent is really just to learn internally from this data. But it's all of that are outlined, and that's why we chose to go with city employees, because there's a lower level of risk, and we also wanted to be clear with them that those that chose to do it is completely voluntary, and that we would disclose the terms around it.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I kind of missed what the terms are exactly. So I get that we're not monetizing it. Does Facebook keep the data, or do we keep the data? Who keeps the data? Is it just passing through?
Let me ask actually you all to speak to how you're using the data, and that will clarify. And I also don't want to get the details of the legal text wrong, but if you guys could take a first whack at that.
Yeah, I won't be able to speak to the specific words of the legal text, but I can talk about in broad brushstrokes what the data that is being collected is. So as part of our early stages of testing user traffic on the network, we do collect a limited amount of data to test system performance. This does include anonymized data on network usage, and it's used for performance measurement only, not to be shared with third parties or anything like that. So it's really about trying to understand the performance of the network itself.
And then I'll have Rob Lloyd from our IT department weigh in from our side to give you a more specific answer on our side.
Thanks.
Yes, council members, so on that, the IPs and the addressing and usage that we see, it's all for performance basis. The city does have some minimal filtering to make sure that people don't go to egregiously inappropriate sites, of certain violence, porn, those kinds of things. But for the actual content that we have, it's strictly about performance related and anonymized. So there's nothing that we keep that's deeper than that, and that's part of the terms of use that you'll see.
Okay, thanks. So for just a specific example, so I'm using my Gmail app and looking at my email. You're just recording that I'm using Gmail, not that this is what my email says.
Actually, not even at that level. So all we see is there's a device that's connected to the internet. It has this much traffic that passed during this time frame.
So just how much data was trafficked through?
And so the patterns we might see in that is if you have a disconnection or there's a slow connection, that would allow us to then react and work with Facebook on what needs to happen to tune the network and the performance.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Here.
So just to summarize, what you keep is the metadata, nothing about the content. Is that right?
Yes and no. Yeah, so Yale can weigh in as well. As we actually have some raw data in terms of IP addressing and traffic, but nothing that's more invasive than that.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Well, I just wanted to thank Yael and Ritu and the entire Facebook team, as well as Dolan and Kip and everybody. Rob, of course, everybody on the city side. I know this has been a big undertaking, but a really important one, and I'm thrilled to see that we've got the universe's largest 60 megahertz system up and running. We'll find out how well it runs in the months ahead, but it's good to have it, and it's good to be on the leading edge. Obviously, when you sit in these chairs, you tend to think about, okay, the next steps for our residents, right? The folks who might take advantage of it, or folks who are working downtown. And as I understand it, Kip, we need to have essentially a Wi-Fi manager in place to be doing this work. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, and I'll let Rob follow up on this, but essentially, we're beginning to get into a business which isn't our core competency. So we want to make sure that we have either the people on board on staff or that we hire the appropriate operator who can run some of the system for us. At this point, the other issue is that this is the same pipe, if you will, that's supporting the rest of the city, so we need to be judicious in how much bandwidth we make available. So these are the kinds of questions that over the next kind of 90 days or so we want to be digging into and answering, not just based on what we think, but based on what other cities are doing, best practices and business model. And then I'll let Rob add probably some better detail onto that.
So along with that, one of the core questions is, what is the identity of our public Wi-Fi activities? Do we want to be an ISP or not?
Right.
And what skill sets and staff, internet service provider, my three-letter acronyms, and what kind of role do we want to have in active management of that? So do city staff need to be managing that for the public, or is there a partnership or a contract that we can be more successful with, much like we've done at the convention center and so forth? The bandwidth that we have for the city, this is a shared use, so it supports city operations, it supports the convention center, it supports the airport, and so we want to be very purposeful about how we structure that and have that conversation with council and the resourcing that goes along with that. One important caveat I'll make is wickedly fast Wi-Fi, for example, was a once-in-time program that's not funded on an ongoing basis for replacement. So as that technology decays or ages out, then we still have to think about what the replacements are, and we want to make sure if this is a core competency for the city for engagement and for inclusion, then our structure reflects that.
Right. And I appreciate it's always a bit daunting for us to be considering new lines of business when we're challenged from a budgetary standpoint to be able to provide what we are doing. But if we were to move this direction, I know right now we're in pilots with Eastside High School District as well. Do you have a sense about how soon we would need somebody sitting in a chair doing this work? So as we're thinking about the budget, whether we need to be carving out that money now to be ready.
Stir myself up. I think that's a really good question. Let me do some quick thinking and back the envelope work on that, because I think there are alternatives to putting a person on this that we might be able to bridge with, but I think that's a very good question, and I'll get a rapid turnaround on that.
Okay, great, thank you. And then, yeah, as I understand the technology, this is pretty much by line of sight, is that right?
It's mostly line of sight. There are parts of the network that are kind of non-line of sight, so the Terragraph nodes will figure out the best path to connect two links, which could involve, honestly, reflecting off of another building, street, or so on and so forth.
That's pretty
and
cool.
So, yeah, some percentage of the nodes on the network or links on the network actually are non-line of sight.
Wow, that's really interesting. So how realistic is it, you think, that we get to gigabit speeds? I'm hearing anecdotal feedback from employees about how fast they're getting, and I'm just curious, is this doable in the near term, or?
Well, so as Telegraph being a backhaul technology, we are observing gigabit-like speeds in the backhaul network. How that then translates into what you see on your phone if you go to speed tests is going to be different, because that's going to depend on the access point you're connected to, and then ultimately some of the limitations that might exist in your phone. So, when I use my iPhone 7, I did not get a gigabit speed because my phone can't download a gigabit. It's the same thing in my home. I actually have fiber connected to my home, and I can't get a gigabit either on this phone because it's a limitation of the device.
Right.
So I think in principle it's possible that a device that's connecting to an access point that is capable of getting a gigabit that connects to Telegraph in principle could do that. But in practice, I think people are going to get speeds that are lower than that, but they're still really, really fast. I mean, we're talking, well over 100 megabits, 200 megabits, maybe 300 megabits to handsets, and that's way above, sort of average broadband in most of this country, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And, given what we know about the wickedly fast network, I'm not looking to gift horse in the mouth here. So we appreciate whatever speed you're giving us. That's fast. But I know, forgive me if you've already answered this question in presentation, I missed it, but how soon do you think we'll be at a point where you're comfortable with the technical testing, and then we could try to take this out on the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think as articulated in the presentation, I think we're feeling pretty confident on the technology, which is why we've sort of said we've completed the EVT testing. I think the next phase of this is it's more than just technology to sort of figure out what the next steps are, right? So the conversation that you've been having around sort of what is the Wi-Fi strategy for the city is, I think, a really important decision to figure out there. I think the other aspect of this is understanding the Wi-Fi technology itself as part of that. That hasn't been our primary focus. We wanted to make sure that the sort of last few hundred meters that goes from fiber to Wi-Fi access points, we wanted to make that our focus and experimentation, and we feel really confident about that. But we want to be really, I think, careful and thoughtful along this process, both to figure out the Wi-Fi strategy, but also, make sure that things around privacy and data protection and things like that, like we feel like it's totally buttoned up.
Okay, and then finally, to really make this impactful for a lot of families who are on the wrong side of the digital divide, to get a signal inside a home, do we need to be buying boosters for families? I mean, how does this work for a child who's trying to do their homework in the living room?
I'm curious what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wearing my hat as a technologist who's thought about connectivity for quite some time, but I think I'm really excited about Telegraph and other technologies to provide that kind of backbone to make it so that there's the opportunity to provide connectivity into a home such that that child can have access to do their homework. But there is still that last 100 meters of technology that is required in order to make sure that the booster, or whatever you want to call it, that they can, pull out their tablet or phone or laptop, whatnot, and get that connectivity, whether it's directly in their home or as part of their community. And I do think that, one, it depends on like what type of environment they live in. If they're in a really dense urban city, there may be a different solution than if they're more in a suburban sprawl. I do think there are technologies that are available to do that at a city scale, but they require the commitment and thoughtfulness to sort of work out what that full comprehensive strategy is to make sure that every child has that opportunity. I am excited about technologies like Terragraph to sort of make sure that once those off-the-shelf technologies, and most of them are off the shelf, to be able to do that last 100 meters, but they require sort of a very careful thinking through of how that's going to be done. Fair?
It is, and I think our thought is now that we have some confidence in the backhaul capability, if you will, this is the right time to begin some experimentation with that. We're particularly interested, as I think many folks on the council are, about not only low-income families, what this might do for them, but also small businesses. It was very difficult and very costly to get fiber to the premise in some of the small businesses. What are the off-the-shelf technologies that will allow them to hop in, take advantage of this, and use this for in-home piece? Primarily right now it's an outdoor backhaul to an outdoor Wi-Fi. So that's our starting point, but we think there is ample room for experimentation, which we feel will lead us to the bigger question of how do we want to close the digital divide. And that's one of, quite separately, we've gotten a very generous contribution from Facebook to help us think about the digital divide issues and begin working on that with the library and other partners. And so I think there's a nice synergy between these two connectivity efforts.
Agreed, and thank you, and please thank the rest of our friends at Facebook for that contribution. We're very appreciative.
Thank you, Councilmember Depp.
First off, just thank you to Facebook for becoming our new local affiliate for this committee meeting on Facebook Live. I see you. I see you out there. But also, I, like Councilmember Davis, am making this a multi-day effort to join this network, not for lack of trying. I've tried to log on using the instructions I followed in, but I can't seem to actually get on. And I don't want to troubleshoot that right now, but you get the password, I find the right Wi-Fi, put in my username and password, and then I've gotten things where unable to connect. Once I got, my phone says it doesn't trust this network. Do I want to trust it? And so I said trust. And then one time I think I got connected to something called Free City Hall Wi-Fi. Is that what it was? For like a hot minute. And then it just kind of bounced. So I'm continually trying over the course of a number of days. I'm looking forward to testing this out. I guess the question I have is in terms of millimeter wavelengths. So my understanding is the shorter the wavelength, the more capacity and information can carry, but because of whatever reasons, the nodes have to be closer together, and it's easily interfered with in terms of like a building or concrete or something. Is that the same thing with this?
This technology does not penetrate buildings.
Okay, so
it doesn't go through concrete or wood, metal, or anything like that.
Okay, and just as a measuring stick, when we talk about like the next generation of like 5G or whatever, how does this? So if I get on this network and I get to see like I'm downloading my email or going to websites or whatever, what is the sense? Is this better than, like faster than, on par with, maybe slightly slower than?
That's a great question. I think the answer is it's still to be determined. So the standards for 5G are being kind of ratified as we speak. And so what is implemented in terms of both backhaul as well as access, ultimately, which goes to the handset, is still being worked out. It is subject also to how much spectrum will be available in a particular region or country, or as implemented in particular technologies. So I do think there is the objective with 5G to increase the speeds relative to what exists today in the LTE standard. And so I'm really hopeful, honestly, that 5G technology is able to provide a big jump in capacity relative to what we experience today. But I think that, yeah, I mean, I know firsthand that at least what I'm able to get on my phone through off-the-shelf Wi-Fi is faster than any LTE connection I've ever experienced myself. So I'm pretty hopeful that this is going to be a really useful technology to kind of scale in the same fashion as 5G. So I do think they're going to be pretty complementary in the same way that Wi-Fi and LTE kind of coexist. I think that the technology that we've worked on, Terragraph, being in the unlicensed 60 gigahertz band, I expect will be complementary with what's happening in 5G as well.
Sure. and this is, I'm going to throw a curveball at you. Um, to the extent that you even looked into this, and I don't know that you did, but the differences in wavelengths. So we're living in the 21st century, and there's all these things buzzing around, Wi-Fi and 4G and LTE, and now we have this new millimeter shortwave thing. It's yet to be determined what that will actually have on the evolution of human physiology or whatever, with all these waves shooting back and forth. But to the extent that there's a change in the wavelength, do you care to guess or just comment on is there anything different about that versus a normal longer, I don't know, wave that's we've been going back and forth with since the 90s?
Yeah, it is a good curveball, but I'm prepared to answer that one. So millimeter waves, and these are used for 5G as well as for this unlicensed technology like Telegraph. They are millimeters in lengths compared to much longer wavelengths, up to meters in length for traditional technology that would exist over Wi-Fi or cellular access. So for things that are cellular frequencies, they typically are, they do penetrate the human body, so the RF goes through your body, which is what makes it very ubiquitous, right? It goes through buildings, goes through people, et cetera, et cetera. Millimeter wave systems is a lot more like light, which I mentioned earlier, almost like lasers. And so you have to be careful about pointing it in a certain direction, but they don't, like light, they don't penetrate. Sure. So we didn't invent millimeter waves. People have been studying them and using them for 20 plus years. So the FCC has rules around emissions and power and so on and so forth. Telegraph adheres to all the FCC rules. The IEEE, which has built standards for indoor in-home use for connecting television screens to laptops and smartphone devices, et cetera, et cetera. There's a technology called WiGig, which is also in the 60 gigahertz range and is honestly the same type of technology we're using for Telegraph. And so I think that the FCC and the IEEE have made a position that they are comfortable with the radiation impact of millimeter waves, rigorously studied by scientific community, and then they update and study this regularly to make sure that this is safe for human use. And so we do think that this is, by staying within all of those guidelines for this system, we think that it reflects the latest thinking of the scientific community.
Great. Thank you so much. That's all.
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank Facebook and our team, too, for what's a very exciting project. And we're looking forward to further updates. We have...
Mr. Chair, if I could, I just wanted, before you go to comment, respond to a question from the mayor that I've gotten a little more additional information on, if that's appropriate.
Sure. Go ahead.
So thanks to the Miracle of Connectivity, your question about the Wi-Fi project manager, I'd actually like to turn it over to Rob to address sort of the timing and the need for that kind of level of support. Rob?
Yep. So somewhere in the next year, we are going to have to decide more of the structure we take for that ISP approach. That could be in-house, though there's some pros and cons of that. It could also be nonprofits like other cities have done, so like Riverside and others. Or could be some other partnership that could emerge. But somewhere in the next year, because of that time frame, we're going to have to decide that. I would actually, to Kip, say that funding should be addressed somewhere along the lines in the next 12 months. But the mode that we use those dollars in could be one of maybe 3 varieties.
So to city manager, bottom line it, yes, we'll need money or a person or a combination of both in order to be able to manage the additional complexity that goes with this level of network out in the public. It doesn't necessarily have to be a body in-house, and that might not be the best answer, but we need somebody somewhere smart and capable to be doing more of this. It's not just another duty as assigned to the existing network engineers.
Yeah, I look forward to working with you and Margaret to figure that out in the next few weeks. Thanks, Kip.
Okay. First speaker is Roxana Marachi.
Good afternoon again, Roxana Marachi, Education Chair of the San Jose Silicon Valley NAACP. As I'm listening to this Facebook Telegraph rollout and hearing that it's the first one of its kind complete rollout in a city, it's concerning to me. I looked up millimeter wave technology and health effects. And that is the the concern of this kind of technology, that you can look it up. I encourage people to look up millimeter wave technology and health effects. A professor from UC Berkeley has a blog on these concerns and has written extensively about it. This is the kind of technology, from what I understand, that we can opt out of in airports. Pregnant women are sometimes recommended to opt out of this technology. The health effects have not been, or the safety has not been determined. It's again, very concerning. In case folks missed it, because we're kind of in a Silicon Valley bubble, there is a very massive scandal right now. Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. Mark Zuckerberg's going to be in the House committee next week. There was an apology for, violations of public trust. It's a little bit surreal to be here and to hear about all these congratulations and everything when this is happening outside of our Silicon Valley bubble. So I hope that we can take a critical lens and understand what the motives are for this kind of work and what the potential risks are, especially with the partners that are being celebrated. So thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. Blair Beekman.
Hi. To further talk about the ideas of Facebook, you're trying to create a relationship with Facebook and trying to talk about the new and improved Facebook ideas. I was really disappointed in how this possibly was a city of San Jose put together the presentation that I looked on the website for. I was really disappointed with it, with what was on the video screen. The person talked about it nicely in its place, but I think I've had a feeling throughout City Hall that there's a nice feeling about the ideas of how to begin to think about fiber optics in the future again, and how to, cabling, underground wiring and cabling, and all that stuff. And in the past, there's just been a good feeling around City Hall that that's a nice way to work and think about and prepare how to build for our future. And this Facebook, what it did, it just completely decimated it and made it look ridiculous. You tried to give it respect and talked about it in nice terms. So I thank you for that, but I'm really disappointed that if you and Facebook are working on such a fine model example for us, we have to talk about fiber optics in the future, I do believe. It's my young and experienced opinion, that that is the future. We can't continuously rely on, 5G and 4G microwave technology, RF technology to save us. I mean, it needs to be talked about differently. We need to be talking about how to put this stuff underground. And I guess that's about all. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Now I'd like to ask for a motion to accept reports D1, 2, 3, and 4.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Motion passes. Blair, I wanted to catch you before you made it back up. Come back down.
Hi. For open forum, I'd like to thank the mayor. He nicely asked about what can be data retention policy and what can be data collection policy. He framed it in a way about the public process and what all that's going to entail. I mean, that could have a privacy commission person himself in charge of that, which would be nice, how to relate that with the public. And I know the IPA, we've talked about the IPA doing some work with that possibly. Yeah, so thank you for that. Your first report that was put off until June, is that officially that was supposed to be an LED, the smart light report, IoT smart light report, I'm guessing. I know you talked about bringing that out to the public. It has been since October 2017 that that was promised to be delivered to the public, and it hasn't. And I appreciate your words, Councilman Dieppe, that you know, you asked about what exactly are we doing with IoT, and I hope you can have that report prepared for, say, May or June, May preferably, but definitely by June, because you had planned ideas about having kind of a rollout in November, that your IoT ideas will be more ready for the public, and it's time to invite the public to the process a bit more, if you can. So thank you for that, for mentioning it. And finally, about the big belly, I'm very worried about the broadband emission process that can happen with those big bellies if you have them, and I hope you can keep the technology and the surveillance stuff on that stuff with the VTA down, just minimal. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Meeting's adjourned.